Hey guys, this is Raj Schaefer. I'm pretty excited about this week's episode, not only because Sean Davis, our guest, is a good friend of mine and somebody I've enjoyed interacting with and reading all of his writing for a long time, but because I'm actually editing the podcast in the beautiful Bozeman, Montana. Myself and some of my block walking teams and some of the campaign sidekick team are all up here helping out with the special election for Congress here in Montana. And I can't think of a better place to be just looking at the scenery, enjoying the beautiful weather and the mountains, and knocking doors. It's pretty darn good block walking weather up here this time of year. So I hope you guys enjoy the podcast because I'm going to get back to block walking.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Our guest this week is Sean Davis. Sean is the co-founder of Federalist.com. He previously worked as the economic policy advisor to Governor Rick Perry during his 2012 U.S. presidential campaign. Sean also worked as the CFO of Daily Caller and headed up Media Trackers, a conservative organization that focuses on transparency and uncovering media bias. Sean worked on The Hill as the chief investigator for Senator Tom Coburn, and he was named by The Hill magazine as one of the top congressional staffers under the age of 35 for his role in spearheading the enactment of the law that created USAspending.gov. Sean received a BBA in Finance from Texas Tech University and an MBA in Finance and Entrepreneurial Management from the Wharton School. I've enjoyed reading everything that Sean's been putting out for the last couple of years, whether it's his incredibly witty Twitter feed or reading everything that he's writing on Federalist.com. I highly recommend you check them out, follow him on Twitter, and make sure you're getting their daily updates via email. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's always great talking to you. It's been a while for us. You've been quite busy with your work at the Federalist and all the other hats that you're wearing. Before we got to get deep into talking about your campaign experience and the part that policy advisors play, give me a little bit more background about how you got involved in politics and kind of an overview of your extensive resume.
So I got involved. I'll say I never intended to get involved in politics. I had always enjoyed it. But when I was in college, I saw an advertisement for a congressional internship and a scholarship program when I was going to class one day. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. I probably won't get it, but I'll apply for it. So I applied for it and ended up getting it, which was kind of a shock to me. So I spent a semester of school working in the House of Representatives in D.C. We had a whole house of, I think we had 8 or 9 students there. We were living together. We'd work on the Hill during the week. And I just loved it. I really enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the people. So I went back to school because I was only a junior at that time and finished up as quickly as I possibly could. So my last year, I took 51 hours, the last calendar year. It was insane. But I was ready to be done with school and get a job and be a productive member of society. So went back up there. I worked in the House initially for the same member who I'd worked with when I was an intern. Really great Congresswoman Heather Wilson, who's from Albuquerque, who hopefully will be our next Air Force Secretary. So worked for her for a bit, moved over to the Senate side to work for the Joint Economic Committee and did economic policy analysis there. And then moved over to Tom Coburn, a senator from Oklahoma, in early '05. And that's kind of where I feel like I really learned I probably learned more in that job than I have in any other job ever, just about policy, about working on the Hill, about how to craft amendments, about how to get news attention for what we were doing. Went from Coburn's office to the Wharton School to get a business degree, to get my MBA there. And then from there, I kind of got started in digital media. I went over to Daily Caller with Tucker and Neil, kind of before that was even a thing. Kind of built their business model up, helped them raise some money, did some startups after that, and then I landed at the Rick Perry for President campaign in 2012. So we all know what happened with that. We can go back and talk there in depth. And then just did a whole bunch of stuff. Did a nonprofit after that, and then in 2013 started the Federalist. So here we are.
So what was it during that time with Coburn that really helped to shape your appreciation for working on the Hill in politics and economics? I know that as an investigator there and spending time with Dr. Coburn, he's somebody that's a rock rib conservative that does great work and is honestly sorely missed in the Senate today. But I'm sure he had a lot to teach you about operating there in the Senate. Talk a little bit more about what that was.
So the thing about Tom Coburn is he never stopped, ever. He was constantly going. He was there before the rest of us got there. He left long after the rest of us left. The guy just had so much energy, but he was there for one reason, and he was there to basically save America and return us to our constitutional roots.
Right.
And so it wasn't a job working for him. We didn't go in and punch the clock, at 8 or 9 and then leave at 5. We were there on a mission, and we had a reason for being there, and we took it really, really seriously. And because we knew we had limited time with him, because he had term limited himself, each day that we didn't do something or accomplish something was a wasted day. I mean, we had this wonderful opportunity to work for this guy who's going to be there for 12 years max, and we had to make the most of it. So that was the first thing, is making the most of every day you have, either working in campaigns or in policy. Don't waste them. And the other thing was, given his experience in the House, he knew how to read bills. He knew how to read the reports that accompany them. He knew how to find all the garbage. So he taught us how to do that. He taught me how to read a bill. I would go through it being this kind of green staffer and think, I looked through it and I didn't find that much bad stuff. He's like, well, you didn't look hard enough. So we would sit down with the bill together and go through it line by line, and he'd mark every single thing he thought could have been bad.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to go and research everything. So at the beginning, when I didn't do it right, it meant I basically had to do research on every single line of a bill. And it wasn't until he got comfortable with my ability to kind of find the junk in there, where he didn't make me do that all the time, but it just forced me to be thorough. And I'll tell you, on the Hill, the number of people who can go through an approach bill and read it and really understand it and understand all the references and understand how people hide things so you can't see it. There's maybe 2 offices in the entire Congress that could do that when I was there, and it was John McCain's and Tom Coburn's.
Gosh, that's incredible. That's definitely a really cool opportunity to get to spend that kind of detailed time learning from somebody like Dr. Coburn, and something I'm sure you'll treasure for a long time.
Yeah, so the thing that he did, which was so great, is he used the hold system. So in the U.S. Senate, most stuff actually happens by what's called unanimous consent. You'll see stuff happening on the floor, and of course bills pass through the floor in a long amendment process and filibusters and all that. But like 80, 90, 95% of stuff that passes by unanimous consent, which means that everybody agreed to it. So if only one person says, no, we're not going to do this, you can hold up the whole train. Mm-hmm. And so that's what Coburn did regularly. He empowered staff. You see a bill that comes through for unanimous consent, you just call the cloakroom and tell them no. And you tell them Tom Coburn says no. So
he made a lot of friends that way.
Yeah. So he actually put up a little sign that said Dr. No next to his desk that somebody gave him. But so after a while, people thought, well, we're not going to let you do this. You're actually going to have to come down to the floor. We're going to try to sneak stuff by you instead of calling out each office on the hotline. So then he put us on the floor, and we'd always have a staffer on the floor all the time saying, nope, he's not going to do that. Nope, he's not going to do that. And the amount of savings we were allowed to either realize entirely by blocking a bill outright or by forcing changes was amazing. I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars that he personally saved just by saying no.
Wow. But I'll tell you that as far as our listeners go, many of the folks that are listening today are potential staffers, folks that want to work in politics for elected members or to help elect individuals or candidates. And these are things that are incredibly important for future office holders to understand. It's like you have that power. I got a buddy of mine down in the state house right now who he serves a very similar role, killing stuff on the local and consent calendar down there in the Texas House. Actually, a couple of my friends down there, and they do awesome work, and they play a very specific role. And much like Dr. Coburn, they're down there trying to make sure that bad stuff does not pass easily. They don't want to just allow this stuff without a fight. And so that's, whether you're talking about your position as a school board or a city council member or working in the United States Senate, your ability to stop bad things is probably as, if not more important, than your ability to get good things accomplished. Those are both positive ends that you can play to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So many people think that your entire career as a legislator or a staffer should revolve around passing stuff, which is a nice thought. If you see something that wants to get changed, yes, you absolutely should go change it. But passing stuff is not the end all and be all of a legislator. We accomplished more by stopping things than we did by doing things, which isn't to say we didn't pass stuff. We passed a pretty landmark, huge transparency bill over the objections of the two most powerful senators in the body, Ted Stevens and Robert Byrd, which opened up all federal spending online. You could just go in and punch in an entity name, and you could get the entire history of that entity's federal funding, grants, expenditures, everything. So, we made a big dent in transparency, but the thing we did more of was stop garbage legislation or stuff that we just couldn't afford from ever becoming law. And so I guess the main thing I learned is you're allowed to say no. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. You don't have to go along with it. You don't have to give in to the pressure when everyone's saying, you have to do this, you got to sign that contract, we've got to get this deal done. You're allowed to just say, no, let's take a step back. We don't have to do this now. We don't have to do this at all. And so many people in Washington forget that because all the momentum is towards doing something rather than actually stopping and thinking, you know what, is this something we should be doing, or is this something we are even allowed to do?
Absolutely. They try to be the hammer that's always looking for a nail. And as a result, oftentimes stuff gets passed too quickly without proper thought. And I'll tell you, especially as somebody that's a new member or that just joins a body, whether it's from city council to the Senate, you're oftentimes told, sit down, shut up, and just wait your turn. Once you get some seniority, then you can get on some committees, then you can start writing some legislation, and maybe eventually we'll let you pass something. But from day one, your parliamentary power allows you the same access, the same options as everybody. And while they may not be on board with you passing some of your bigger pieces of legislation or reforms, you're still able to go stop stuff. And that gives you leverage. That makes you have a seat at the table. So don't forget that. It's important that you remember your ability to stop stuff is as, if not more important than what you put on the table to get passed.
That's exactly right.
All right. So one of the reasons I want to have you on, Sean, is that we've had a lot of different people on the podcast that have had different roles in the campaigns, from running them, being candidates, being field staff, etc. But there's also the role of policy advisor. And this varies from kind of a kitchen cabinet position for a more local campaign to an official, paid staff position on some of the bigger, statewide or presidential campaigns. And that's the role that you played as an economic policy advisor for Governor Perry when he ran for president in 2012. And I think it's something that's often overlooked as far as having outside help or bringing people in to help educate a candidate or a campaign on policy, because it's kind of this hybrid role between a think tank policy analyst and part of the communication staff. And it's really, really important that you understand as a candidate the actual policy, what the implications of it are, and that it's not already pre-engineered as far as your communications package. Talk about your role, kind of how you see campaigns needing to use that policy analyst role and what you did there on the presidential campaign for Perry.
So that's such a great question, especially in light of 16.
Oh, yeah.
It's, 2016, if you look at it isolated, you probably think, policy doesn't matter. Here, Trump didn't put out white papers. He just kind of said what he thought. But I would disagree with what I think is the conventional wisdom that policy doesn't matter, because even though Trump had a different way of promoting it, he pushed policy. He just didn't do it the way most people did.
140 characters at a time.
That's right. Well, and people, he wanted to make America great again. So, you can make fun of that for being glib, for not being detailed enough. But he made clear that was his policy. He just didn't issue a whole bunch of boring white papers that nobody was ever going to read along with it. So what we did with the Perry campaign is he came in pretty late in the 2012 cycle. So he didn't announce until, I think, midsummer 2011.
Yeah, I think it was early August, right? The Red State Gathering.
Yeah. So he got in pretty late. And the perception, I think, among his team was, we don't have time for him to be an expert on every policy like a Mitt Romney might be. So we need people to come in who know that stuff cold and they can just hit the ground running, get him ready and going. So I was brought in to do economic, tax, budget policy. If it had a dollar sign in front of it, that was pretty much my thing. And the big project I had with him was helping him to craft a big tax reform plan. So I remember early on talking in the policy shop to the people who were above me, kind of between me and Perry, and said, well, we know there's a bunch of things we could do, different ways we could go. We could just do the kind of typical tax cuts here, make sure these people are okay, some stuff over here. We can do kind of like a stepwise reform, move down to a couple brackets, kind of consolidate, or we can go big. And I remember the phone conversation I had with the policy director at that time, and she said, yeah, so Rick Perry doesn't nibble around the edges. Rick Perry goes big. So let's not do the little rinky-dink stuff around the margin. Let's go big. And we did. We went flat tax, corporate and personal. I think it was 20% on both sides. We figured out how to balance the budget by 2020, even with this big tax cut. I mean, it was a big, sweeping, comprehensive tax reform proposal. Because at that time, Herman Cain was like the flavor of the month. If you remember 999.
Absolutely.
Everyone was all about 999, and we kind of came in, and I thought we blew that out of the water with a really well thought out, detailed plan. So, you talked about communications being real important. On a campaign at that level, the communications tends to drive the policy. Now, I thought we had a pretty good balance in the Perry campaign. We had an amazing policy team and an amazing policy shop. If you go back and look at the stuff that he put out and he proposed, I mean, it was so detailed. It was comprehensive. We've not seen anything much like that. And that kind of gets forgotten in light of oops and all that, which people like to pay attention to. But it was that campaign was a really policy juggernaut, and we melded it with the communications team so well. It wasn't like the policy people were doing their own thing and the communications people were doing their own thing. If you want to do it really well, you constantly have to be pushing together and working together. And I think you really have to say, look, we want good policy, but here's the message we want to put out. If you do all your white papers first with all your little details and you try and draft a communication strategy around that, you're going to be in trouble. Kind of what we started with was we need big, bold tax reform that makes it easier for people to do their taxes, so easy they can do it on a postcard.
Well, and this is one of those areas where from the candidate on down, you got to have very clear direction as far as what he wants or she wants you to do. So from Perry, he said, hey, I want real, strong, budget balancing tax reform that's going to give a lot of money back in the pockets of businesses and families. And from there, you had a communication shop and a policy shop that worked very well together, because what you have in a lot of cases is a communication shop that tells the policy shop what the policy is supposed to be, or the policy shop that tells the communication guys, we're just going to put out these boring white papers. And in either one of those scenarios, you end up with a losing campaign. But when you have them work together, what you have is a policy shop that's going to put together an incredibly innovative, effective tax reform program. And you're going to have a communication shop that's able to come along and work with them, and it's going to be able to say, hey, we got all these white papers, but at the end of the day, what we're telling voters is we're selling them the ability to do their taxes on a freaking postcard. And that's something that sticks with voters, that they remember, that a lot of folks remember today, whereas I don't remember the details of what the actual policy position was. I just know that it involved very simple, very flat, affordable taxes.
Yeah, well, I recall conversations we all had with Perry at the beginning to figure out where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do, why he was running, and he was pretty clear. I may be mixing up the words just a little bit, but I think his theme or his slogan was, we need to get America back to work, or get America working again. So everything we did was built around that. How does this get people back to work? How does this get America working again? Because, we were coming out of a recession in 2011. People just weren't feeling great about things. And so everything we did, whether it was government reform, cutting spending, working on taxes, helping veterans out who came back and needed help, it was all about getting America back to work and getting America working again. And the great thing about working for Perry is he had been such a successful governor and such a successful chief executive. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't this green candidate trying to come in who thought he needed to let everyone know who the boss was, or thought he had to prove, I know this and I know that. No, he had his vision. He knew what he wanted to do, and he hired people to help him implement that vision. And because of that, the campaign worked really well. The comm staff knew what they were doing, policy staff knew what they were doing, and from there it was just a matter of executing.
So as far as your role as a policy advisor, you learned a lot about how that role operates within that campaign. If I'm a state rep candidate or even a congressional candidate, I may not have the budget to bring on somebody that's a full-time policy advisor, let alone be able to break that up into a couple fields of study, economics, policy advisor, and social and international, whatever. What advice do you have for some of those candidates as far as how they can bring in people who understand policy and get that outside education that's not pre-filtered by the communication staff?
So I think the most important thing you have to do is, one, know why you're running. I talk to so many candidates and potential politicians. Why do you want to run? Well, I've just always wanted to be in politics. Why do you want the seat? Well, I've just always wanted to serve in elected politics. Okay, that's a terrible reason.
Yeah.
You may be a great person, a great successful career. You've got a good head on your shoulders. You've got good morals. But you don't just run because you think it'd be a fun thing to do. You have to know why you're running. You have to have a reason for running. If you know your reason, if there's a particular issue that motivates you, I think the first thing is you don't have to hire anyone. There's nothing keeping you from doing research and becoming an expert on your own. And I think that's more true the more local you get. So if you start up at president, okay, that's just not possible. There's too much stuff. Our government's involved in too many things. There's too many issues. You can't be an expert on all of them. But if you're running for a city council seat or a school board seat, there's no reason on earth you can't spend the time and learn the issues yourself. Because in my experience, the most successful people are the ones who really get the issues. So Perry, for example, he'd been governor for close to a decade, actually over a decade at that point when I came on. Man, he knew Texas cold. He knew how that government worked. He knew where everything was hidden. He knew all the games and the tricks. That's why he was so successful. Working for Coburn, this was a guy who didn't outsource everything to staff. Every single thing we gave him, he read and absorbed and got pretty darn close to memorizing. The successful politicians are the ones who really understand, have done the work, and have put in the time and done the research. So, number one, know why you're running. Be focused on something that you want to fix or change. And then number two, learn the issue yourself, do the research yourself, because if you know it yourself, nobody can get around you. Nobody can pull one over on you.
Well, that's great advice. And there are just so many opportunities out there, from the raw data to think tanks, both local and state and federal, that can help aggregate some of the information and point you in the right direction. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of the candidate. They're the person that's running. If you as a candidate don't understand the reasons, the why you're running, why you're the person for the job, and why right now is your time, if you can't articulate those things to voters and have confidence in them yourself, you're not going to convince anybody. And beyond that, you need to be able to understand the policies and the implications of them on a very deep level. Because otherwise, it's going to be very easy for you to be stumped when you're trying to communicate these to someone else or being challenged on them. You won't be a very articulate or effective champion for those policy reforms if you don't know them backwards and forwards yourself.
That's right. So what I'm recalling from my marketing classes, the thing that they always drill into you is focus on benefits, not features. Okay, don't say this thing has seat warmers. Say, you know what, when you've got to get up in the morning and it's cold and your car's outside, you can hop in and you're going to be cozy right away. Okay, sell the benefit, don't sell the feature. And so many policy people in politics forget that. They get so absorbed into the details. Well, I'm going to do this thing and it's going to lower the tax rate to this. And then we're going to do some deduction stuff over here and it's just going to be really great because we're going to make all these changes. Okay, so what?
Right.
You have to be able to translate the thing you're doing to why it matters to people. And in the most successful people in politics, whether they're on the policy side or the communication side, are able to translate the things that happen in law, the things that happen in government, translate those into why they matter to your daily life. Okay, so we didn't just want to put taxes on a postcard because it'd be fun to be able to do your taxes on a postcard. It's because you got back hours and days and weeks of your life by not having to sit there with your 1040 and go through it line by line. We saved you money that you could spend on your kids, on gas, on sports, on you name it, instead of having to spend it on an accountant. You have to be able to translate things that happen in government to why it matters in people's lives, because that's ultimately the only reason you should care about policy. Policy for its own sake, who cares? It's boring and it's dry and it's dumb. If you can't articulate why that policy matters and how it's going to make people's lives better or worse, if it happens to be a bad policy, you really have no business being in it in the first place.
So there's two sides of that communication style, right? There's your ability to communicate those things effectively to voters. One is the preparation and the packaging of those things, how well you understand the actual policy, and the other is more on the individual personal preparation side. And you've kind of talked about that first part, but as somebody that's observed a lot of campaigns and helped and as part of the media, been able to see a lot of people do this well and poorly, what are what's some of the advice you would give candidates as they're trying to prepare themselves on a personal level to be out there in front, championing those policies and trying to articulate that to voters and the media?
So I think, man, that's a really difficult question. We could spend hours just on that. I think you have to know the one single message you're trying to communicate. When you're talking to media, when you're doing an interview, people think, oh, I've got a lot of time here. I can talk about 3 different things. No, you got to pick one idea. You got to pick one theme. What's the one thing you want people to walk away with and remember about what they just heard? So that was actually kind of the genius of Trump's campaign. Make America Great Again. The hats, the posters in the background, his tweets, him talking. He might have been talking about the wall. He might have been talking about bombing terrorists, but everything was about making America great again. So you have to know the one thing you want to communicate. So I think that overall is by far the most important thing as a communicator or as a politician. You can know when you're doing media interviews or talking to voters, how am I going to communicate this one thing? And I think the second thing is you have to know the issue enough that you're not just reciting talking points, because there will come a time where you've gotten your message across, but you're not going to have an interviewer who's just going to let that go. They want to challenge you.
Right.
Reporters now especially love putting themselves on the same level, as though they're equals with the person they're listening to. They're involved in the same thing, even though they're not. They come into it with that mindset thinking, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to be the one with the gotcha. I'm going to be the one who stumps him. You have to be ready for that. And if you're only 2 or 3 talking points deep, man, they're going to get you. We saw a good example of that during the Republican primary debates in 2016 with Rubio. The fact that he couldn't go more than 1 or 2 talking points deep, that ended his campaign. So,
right.
Maybe in hindsight, he wasn't going to win at all, regardless of what happened at that New Hampshire debate. Maybe Trump was a juggernaut no matter what. But that debate ended him, and it's just a good example of what happens when you only have your 1 or 2 talking points down. Anybody who wants to drill into you and wants to get past that can do it. You want to make sure you don't give them that opportunity. You have to know enough so that you can talk about an issue intelligently and in depth for as long as a typical interview is going to last. If you drill somebody for an hour on tax policy, okay, you're going to get them, you're going to trip them up. They're going to say, oh, I don't know, or I'll have to check on that. But in a 2 or 3 minute interview, there's really no excuse for not knowing the info cold enough that you can talk around and about an issue from a number of different angles for several minutes without having to go to rote scripted talking points, which people can sniff out now.
Well, and that goes back to what you mentioned earlier. When you're preparing from the policy staff side or as a candidate, you have to know those things very carefully yourself and have to do a lot of that research personally. And even if you're working on a bigger campaign, when you have staff to help you with that, it actually becomes a bigger thing for the candidate to make sure they're pushing to ask the tough questions. In that role as the candidate, when you're dispatching your staff to do the research and help brief you, you have to take on, whether you're doing the research yourself or having it done commissioned for you, you have to put yourself in the role of that person who's trying to find your weaknesses, trying to find the question you can't answer, and identify what those are and where you should go look or have someone go look for those tough questions and the answers.
Yeah, so that's another really great point, is that as a candidate, the policy people work for you. You don't work for the policy people. So I remember when we were getting ready to launch the tax plan with Perry, the thing was pretty much done from my perspective. And, big, long outline, briefing book, all that. And we got together with Governor Perry. There might have been 5 or 10 of us. And we just sat in a conference room for several hours and went, line by line, provision through this thing. And he'd say, why this and not that? Okay, why did you do this rate and not that rate? Why is this thing in and why is that thing not in? And I mean, it was exhaustive and exhausting going through there, but he wanted to know why everything was there and why it mattered. And as a result of that, we went back and changed stuff. We said, okay, you know what? That was a good point. You put some pressure on that point there. We need to find a way to relieve that. So we went back and changed it. It should be a collaborative back and forth process. As a candidate, you should never feel compelled to take something, any recommendation from anyone, and feel compelled to just do it exactly that way. It's just like a contract. If you're in business and someone brings you a contract, okay, you don't have to sign that thing as written. You can go and make changes.
Right. It's not just a take it or leave it thing. This thing can evolve. And it works the same way once you're talking about being in office and looking at legislation. We're not just talking about a binary equation between, pass it or kill it. This is a whole deliberative parliamentary process where we can amend this sucker.
Yeah, everything is open to revision. Everything. And, you can get in trouble doing that. Lawyers generally get in trouble doing that. They will change commas. And they'll change stuff until they're not allowed to change stuff anymore. It's just the nature of what they do. So you can kind of get lost in the amendment or revision process. But it's just important for candidates to understand their staff work for them. And the politicians need to understand they're the principal. They're the ones with the election certificate. It's their name on the door. They're the ones who got the votes. They're in charge, and they call the shots. And in so many offices in Washington, you would be amazed how many staff call the shots. It's horrifying.
Yeah, what's the saying? 30-year-olds, the 30-year-olds run the House and 40-year-olds run the Senate. It's one of those things where because most of these members, they don't do what Dr. Coburn did. They truly trust the staff to do all of their filtering, all of their research, and they bring the options, this handful of options that they think their boss should take, and their boss just kind of goes eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and picks whichever one they think is most popular. That's sadly the way a lot of these offices operate. And it comes down to a leadership failure on the part of the actual member. If they're not truly running the staff, if they're not dispatching the staff saying, hey, this is what we want to do, these are our overarching goals, these are the things we promised our constituents, and this is how we're going to execute them. This is what I need you to go research, and then questioning them on the results of that policy research and what they think they ought to be done. If you're not doing those things, you're not doing your job. And from the staff side, when you're working for somebody, if they're not asking the right questions, it's on you to help try to prepare them, to figure out what those questions are, to anticipate the needs of your boss, and make sure that you're providing the right options and a whole slate of them for that member to go and make the best decision for their constituents.
It gets back to what we talked about earlier. You have to know why you're there. If you don't know why you're there, exactly, you're gonna get led around by everyone who does. And it was that's important both in running. It's important in picking staff too. Even if this is why I'm here, if you pick staff who don't align with that vision, you're going to get in trouble, because then they're going to view their job as convincing you to do other stuff. There's two models. There's the staff who thinks the member's there to do what the staffer wants, and there's the staffer who's there because they share the vision of the member and they want to be a part of implementing that vision. And I think one reason we were so successful in Dr. Coburn's office is he had a very clear vision of why he was there, and everyone he hired not only had the same vision, but wanted to accomplish it and wanted to see it just the same way he did. So everyone was completely aligned. We were all there. We may be doing different stuff, whether it's reading letters or writing press releases or talking to constituents. We were all there for the same reason. And as a result, we weren't a just collection of people who were collecting a paycheck. We were an actual team. And it's amazing how much more successful you can be when you build a team rather than a staff.
Well, and that really went back to not just who he hired, but who applied, right? I mean, he really built this reputation, as have other folks like former Senator DeMint, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, these guys that are known for believing something, for being there for a purpose. They've made that clear to their constituents and their staff. And as a result, the people that want to apply to those jobs, they know that they're signing on to a shared vision. They know that they're going to be filtered based on that. And that if they're brought on the staff, that they're there for a cause. It's not about the personality. That seems to be one of those things that goes throughout the entirety of those organizations, from the candidate on down. And from the campaign to the official side, all through the hiring process. Is that kind of what you saw there in Dr. Coburn's office?
Yeah, it was fascinating how he did it. So he spent 6 years in the House before he ran for the Senate. So he kind of got the joke. He knew the games that people play,
Right.
and he knew he wasn't going to play them. So rather than doing the typical senator thing of coming in and just taking all the recommendations from leadership about who to hire, oh, this person's been here forever, they know everything.
It's such a trap.
Yeah, so he's like, you know what? I'm going to hire people who don't know anything. I'm going to hire people who want the same things I want, who are smart and work hard. So he actually hired a bunch of people, myself included, who were not at all qualified for our jobs. So, I had done some amount of policy analysis, but I just, out of nowhere, I had this massive legislative portfolio to handle. I had no idea what I was doing. And everyone was like that. He hired young people who were hungry, who were hardworking, who were smart, and wanted the same things he wanted, under the assumption that we would figure it out. And we did. And what we found was that we figured things out very differently than the way the job had always been done.
Surprise.
Yeah, we didn't learn all the ways that everyone else does it, which just happened to be the wrong ways. We kind of figured out our own ways. We came up with totally new ways of doing stuff, really innovative stuff, to the point where he would have members come up to him and scream at him, we don't do things like this. Nobody's ever done this before. And he'd laugh and he'd say, that's exactly right.
Absolutely.
So it's important, you need people who know what they're doing, but you want to make sure that the people you hire have the right experience, because sometimes you're better off hiring people who are motivated and work hard and want what you are. That can be a better decision than hiring someone who's learned all the wrong lessons and has all the wrong experience, even if their resume looks amazing. So what we ended up with in Coburn's office were a bunch of young whippersnappers in 2005 who were just hungry and eager and wanted to help him do what he wanted to do. And it worked out marvelously.
Well, that's something we talk a lot about on the campaign side here, is if you're loyal, you're hardworking, and you're teachable, then the rest, the job experience and those kind of things, specific skill knowledge, that's all stuff that can be taught later, as you guys found there. But what you can't teach is you can't teach that principle, that work ethic, and that loyalty. And you guys had that. Dr. Coburn understood that if I can assemble that kind of team, we can take on these guys, because we're going to be fighting in a totally different way that they do not understand. And you guys were able to stop billions of dollars in bad legislation and regulation as a result of it, because you were thinking and acting a different way. And I'll make a quick note. That whole idea that we mentioned earlier about hiring staff based on leadership's recommendations, that's an absolute trap. That's a way to make sure that your office never does anything that is contrary to leadership. They're going to stack the deck in your office with people that will do their bidding, that owe their job to leadership, not you. And so that's a pretty good way to find yourself fighting internally very, very quickly.
So the little kind of matrix I came up for hiring when I was with Coburn, based on how he did it, a little 2x2 box. And you've got on the left, you've got execution and attitude, and on the top, you've got execution and attitude. So if you judge people by those two characteristics, I can handle someone who's great at execution but doesn't have a great attitude. I mean, if you're getting stuff done, I can handle it. If you're surly, you're not that fun to be around. If you've got a great attitude and you're eager, I can handle it that you don't execute perfectly. But if you're bad at executing and you've got a bad attitude, you're a dud and you're gone. And if you are great at executing and you have a great attitude, you're going to be a rock star. And that's who Coburn hired. He hired people who had a great attitude and who learned how to execute. If you do that in every single organization, you'll be successful, because you pretty much don't need to judge anyone on anyone other than those two. If you've got executors and great attitudes, you're going to succeed, whether it's you're hiring policy people or communications or door knockers. That's all you need.
So during your time as kind of part of the media, from working at media trackers and kind of fact-checking the fact-checkers and doing investigative journalism, working there at the Daily Caller as that started up with Tucker, and now with starting the Federalist and shaping so much of the narrative on the conservative side, you've observed a lot of campaigns, both winners and losers, and you've got to know a lot of the players that are involved in successful campaigns across the country on our side of the aisle. What are some of those lessons you've learned from those observations, and some of the things that you look for when analyzing whether a campaign is on the right or the wrong track?
That's a really good. It's a difficult question, especially in light of 2016. I have to be honest. 2016 made me doubt so many things that I thought I knew about politics.
Right.
It's been it was a very humbling, bracing experience as a pundit. Being one of the people thinking, "Oh, Trump doesn't have a chance. What's he doing? This is crazy."
Right.
And then he comes through and he's like, "Nope, I knew what I was doing the entire time." So, I mean, number one, in light of 2016, you always have to be checking your own assumptions. There's an assumption that, oh, if somebody's been following politics for a long time, they're an expert. Okay, so I follow politics a long time. I've worked at the highest levels in it, and I got 2016 totally wrong.
Same here.
So you asked about the media. There's not a lot of humility in media. So many people who got so many things wrong over the last year are engaged in the active process of forgetting they ever got anything wrong. So that's just, I'm going to throw a huge caveat out there for all of my recommendations here that I got a big one wrong. I might be getting this wrong. So
just put an asterisk next to 2016. We'll just count that as the caveat.
So I guess in trying to figure out whether campaigns, how they're doing, there's metrics you can look at. There's obviously polling. I think we have to put a lot less weight in that, given what we saw in 2016. I really focus on process. That's what I try and focus on. Are they doing the little things that the campaigns do well? The kind of things that build up over time. So the great thing that Trump did well, that he got mocked for just 4 words, was "Make America Great Again." Okay, his communication strategy, people in the Beltway and the people in the Acela corridor didn't like it, but it worked. People got it.
Absolutely.
Other things, fundraising. Are you raising the kind of money you need to raise to be competitive and do the things you need to do? Now, Trump is a gajillionaire. He didn't have the same need to do fundraising that most typical candidates do. Other little things, and I mean very little things. Are you showing up to events on time? Are you doing, very basic advance work so it looks like you're a professional who knows what he's doing? There's just so many little things like that across the board where 1 or 2 not going right, you're like, somebody had a bad day. Somebody dropped the ball, that happens. But if you see a campaign where, the little things are wrong always, those are the ones you really need to get worried about. So looking at campaigns that did things right, the Ted Cruz campaign, from my perspective, was an absolute machine. They did everything right. Their technical execution was so good from top to bottom. But great execution, great technicals. They couldn't beat a guy who was an outsider and just personally had the thing that people wanted. Ted Cruz was never going to be the crazy outsider who was just going to blow things up, even if he pitched himself that way. When you're the guy who's already in office going against this other guy who's never been, doesn't matter how perfect your stuff is. You talked earlier about timing. Trump got the timing. He got the moment. No amount of perfect execution can overcome the right person at the right moment with the right message. I think that's also important. People can get bogged down in technicals. I think the Romney campaign is probably a good example of that in 2012. They were kind of the prototypical, we do everything perfect, we do everything by the book, but he just wasn't the right man at the right moment, and he lost. Cruz ran I thought, pretty close to a perfect campaign in 2016 from just a technical execution point of view, and he lost. He wasn't the right person, he wasn't the right time, and he didn't have the right message.
I think that your point is very, very well taken as far as your need to execute the small things well. And this is why, when you're training, when you're trying to become a more disciplined person, or when you're sending somebody through an Army boot camp, they focus on the small things, because being disciplined in those small things means that when you're paying attention and have a bigger opportunity for bigger things, then you're going to be disciplined in those as well. And when I'm looking at these campaigns, especially the state and local ones, I'm kind of wondering, hey, how quickly are these guys putting out yard signs that are requested? When a constituent calls, do they get called back? Is there a letter, a thank you note sent out for donations? Are they knocking doors? Are they making an effort to get these small things done right? If so, that's a pretty good sign that they're going to be healthy when it comes to bigger budgets, bigger platforms, and more media attention. But if they're not, then it definitely makes me feel like there's probably a chance that if given the bigger stage that they're craving, they're going to fall flat on their face.
I think that's exactly right. In many ways, I think Trump was an anomaly. We talked about that earlier. He was just such a he's like a category killer. I mean, nobody had ever come up against something
Right.
like that. So, but in general, there's not going to be a Trump in every race. You're not going to have a billionaire with 100% name recognition, in your local school board race. And I think when you're dealing in campaigns where your opponents have less name recognition and less money, the fundamentals become so much more important. If you're going against a guy who everyone knows with a gajillion dollars, a lot of times your execution isn't going to matter. You've either got the moment or you don't. But if you're running a local race, if you're running for city council, okay, your mailers need to look good. They need to have your message on it. You need to be knocking on doors. You need to be knocking on the right doors. You need to make sure that you're targeting the right people, that you are thanking everyone, that you're responding to emails. Those little things tell people a lot about you. And so much about politics for me is informed by a parable in Luke in the Bible, the parable of the shrewd manager. And the purpose of it is he who can be trusted with small things can be trusted with big things, like you said, and he who cannot be trusted with small things should never be trusted with big things. And so much of campaigning is getting the little things right over and over and over again. And over time, all those little things, if you've done your job, will end up being one big thing, which is you winning an election and getting the opportunity to do the thing you wanted to do.
All right, Sean. So as we're kind of nearing the end here, I want you to kind of check some of my assumptions or the lessons that I've learned from Trump and kind of the anomaly that he may have been, or some people think it's going to change the game for good. As I look at that, I see folks like myself and you that got a lot wrong last year when it comes to how Trump rose to power and how he assumed the presidency, kind of seizing that moment you talked about. But I also see a lot of people now on the state and local level, even like in the state house, state senate level, that are talking about how the game has changed and they're going to run an entirely different campaign this year than they would have a couple of years ago because the traditional wisdom is out. You don't have to do so many of these small things that you've talked about well, because you can just have the loud style. You can be very anti-PC, and that you can win based on that alone. Do you think that part has changed on the more local level at the same way that we've seen Trump affected on the national level, or is there a real difference between those two spheres?
See, in that vein, I'm not sure all that much has changed. I think what people liked about Trump is he came across as authentic. Now, whether he is, I don't know. I've never met him. But, people saw his Twitter feed, journalists especially would think, oh, this is crazy. We can't have a presidential candidate saying this stuff. But what people saw in that wasn't the actual words that he was typing in. They saw a guy who just said what he thought. Like, wow, we never get that in politics. We get, the press releases and the talking points. I love that this guy just says what he thinks. That's what we need. So I think you can get yourself into trouble if you are a politician running for something and think I can just do the Trump thing. I'll just go and say outlandish things and say crazy things to get attention. I think that kind of misses the point. I think what people really want now is authenticity, and they want sincerity. So there's ways you can do that. You can, have your own Twitter account that's very obviously run by you. You talk about whatever. But I think it is important in politics. We talked about this earlier. When you're dealing with questions and interviews, you don't want to look like you're reading a script. And one thing people loved about Trump is he didn't look like he was reading a script. We had, I guess, taught ourselves or convinced ourselves that in order to be a good politician, you had to be polished and you had to be perfect and you had to look like you're at a central casting. No, I think people just want someone who wants to serve for the right reasons and who says what they think. They're not cowed by, worried that somebody will call them names. Because, of course, especially if you're a conservative or Republican, you're going to get called names. It's kind of the nature of the beast. So rather than blowing, what Trump did with Twitter and kind of just saying what he thinks, I'm not sure that blew up any sort of campaign paradigm. I think that just reinforced that people want someone who's authentic and sincere, or who is at least perceived as authentic and sincere.
I think you're exactly right, and that's definitely the lesson I would encourage, especially the local and the state folks, to take away from this is don't just believe that you can throw the bombs and that's enough to get you the attention and get the voters to believe in you. But focus on authenticity, being the same person in front of and off camera. If you're the same type person when you're meeting with a small group of Tea Party members as you are when you're meeting with the media or a group of donors, that authenticity is going to be pervasive through your entire campaign. You're going to be able to see that. Voters are going to be able to appreciate that. Now, Sean, I think you're right. I think that's a very good analog for how we translate the lessons from Trump's campaign down to this local level. All right, so as we're kind of wrapping up here, I really appreciate your time and the lessons you've been able to show with us. It's been a lot of fun. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing today at the Federalist and how folks can reach you online. I want folks to get a chance to find out more about you guys because it's just a fantastic organization. You guys do a lot of great work that I read on a daily basis.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so the Federalist was started by Ben Dominich and me in September of 2013. We saw what we thought was a gap in kind of conservative political commentary. Everything was focused on Washington. We wanted to focus as much as we could on stuff that wasn't in Washington, kind of the nexus of culture and politics. So that's a lot of pop culture, TV, movies, you name it. And so we came up with, we're able to build a great stable of writers, most of whom are not anywhere near, hundreds of miles of DC. So instead of getting kind of like the DC conservative egghead think tank picture, we've got a lot of moms with kids writing for us rather than the professional political pundit. So we've been really, really thrilled with it so far. It's been going great. People who want to reach me online, probably the easiest place is Twitter. My Twitter handle is Sean M. Dav, SeanMDav, or they can find me at The Federalist.
And that's thefederalist.com, right?
Thefederalist.com.
I highly recommend folks check that out and make sure that you subscribe to their daily email digest. They have some fantastic articles that come out every day, and I know that I'm guilty of not visiting this site as often as I should just to go find the new stuff. Well, they take care of on a daily basis, sending out the best hits of the previous day so you can stay up to date and engaged. It's just a wonderful resource. I highly recommend you guys check it out and get those daily emails because it's really, really good. Sean, as we're wrapping up, any final words of wisdom for folks as they're prepping to go out and win public office?
Know why you're running and knock on doors. Forget about buying ads. Forget about being slick. Know why you're running and spend every waking moment knocking on doors.
Music to my ears. All right, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, we'll have all of Sean's contact information and links to the Federalist and their email sign up in our show notes. Make sure to check out campaignsidekick.vote to give our sponsors some love and find out how you can use them to knock some doors. And we'll talk to y'all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.